Welcome back, pro wrestling fans. Welcome back, IWC. It's me. It's me. It's the GOC. Coming to you live to tape, 25 feet below the surface of the earth. We're here for another special edition of Chaos Corner. The headquarters are empty except for the wild nature sounds of the GOC. Because that's me. Beyond the squared circle, wrestling extras. The world of wrestling is vast. There's much more to the industry than the action in the ring. There are entire peripheral industries related to the business. We all know that, and that's what we're going to cover here today on Chaos Corner. It's going to be a beautiful week. It's bright and sunny. The weather and humidity is coming around and it's floated off. It's going to be a beautiful week here in the greater New England tri-state Northeast area. Give a big shout out to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Without him, none of this would be possible. And without you fans, Chaos Corner wouldn't be here. So once again, sit back and relax, grab a beverage. We have some interesting stuff to cover when it comes to everything, including collectibles, memorabilia, conventions. And remember the time frame. We're here in 2023, and we're going back 25 years ago, 35 years ago, and then fast forwarding to today's business. You're going to learn a lot here today. Once again, as I always say, school is in session. Follow me on all social media platforms. Meet me back here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. Don't you dare miss it. All right, fans. Follow me on Twitter at BigDaddyGOC. And the GOC stands for the Guardian of Chaos. You could say Twitter, I guess, although we kind of know that now it's X. Follow me on Instagram, The Guardian of Chaos. On Facebook, I have 2 accounts. That's right, there's 2 entertainment purposes. J Brony. That's right, Jabroni. J Brony. Just like it sounds. And Prodigio Fidelis El Guardian. Follow me on Gitter, Gab, Truth Social, Rumble. I cover it all in the IWC. Let's adjust the sounds here in Chaos Corner. Alexa, higher the volume. All right, fans, let's enjoy today. Stay within the day. Positivity, good vibes. And let's do the best that we can do. Because Jesus Christ is coming back soon. Don't be caught dead without him. For example, there's a whole world of media dedicated to providing you with all the latest and greatest information on your favorite stars. Now remember, fans, on this issue, it's beyond the squared circle, wrestling extras, a match made in heaven, a complete idiot's guide with Burt Randolph Sugar and Captain Lou Albano, and yours truly, the Guardian of Chaos. So that's what we're covering here today. As I said, there's a whole world of media dedicated to providing you with all the latest and greatest information on your favorite stars. Just because you watch wrestling on Monday nights or Wednesday nights or Friday nights or pay-per-views, and I won't call them PLEs, doesn't mean there's not a whole world outside of that. And I know that all you fans out there know this. The conventions are off the hook. Autograph signings, virtual autograph signings during the pandemic. I mean, there's more merch and memorabilia, but there's a lot of hucksters, a lot of shysters, a lot of people not necessarily on the up and up in this business. So you have to do your research. You have to find credible people, quality merchandise. Do your research or you'll get burned. Because as I said, in the pro wrestling industry, which I love, and it's a part of me, it's in my blood and always will be till the day I die, it's a carny business, and that's a good thing and a bad thing both in the same way, in the same breath, in the same sentence. You guys know what I'm talking about with the pro wrestling business. Telephone, telecommunications, telemarketing. Tell a wrestler or a wrestling fan. And there's gold in them thar wrestlers. Even for people who don't own a TV network, the gold is to be found in collectibles, memorabilia. Wrestling has spawned a lively market in everything from autographs to action figures, clothing to comic books. Whatever you're just like having, whether you just like having memorabilia or your favorite stars around, or you're into collecting as an investment, listen up, vendors, promoters. You'll want to check it out. It's full of tips on what collectibles are right here on the channel and where to find it and how to turn it into cash, which is a sketchy business. Remember the time frame. I keep repeating it here on these episodes. Go back and check out yesterday. I did an unbelievable behind the locker room door episode that you're not going to want to miss. When it comes to collectibles and memorabilia and autographs and making money, again, there's a lot of people out there that are trustworthy that you can follow and that you can purchase from. Maybe we'll get into that on a different episode, maybe even here today. But just remember, there's a lot going on in pro wrestling and who to trust and who not to trust. From newsprint to radio to the World Wide Web, the information and excitement really is ready and waiting for you. I have a bunch of stuff here down in the bunker, here in Chaos Corner. Everything from old programs to lineups, to wrestling events, to autograph signings, to an actual table I went through signed by Yokozuna, the two-time WWE heavyweight champion. So as we look on, roll up your sleeves right now, okay? Come on in and let's enter the ring in this world. Again, I'm not an authority on it. I've been involved in several. I have attended several. I appear as a guest at several. You really want to know, go out there and follow the quality people that are in this market. It's not easy to find someone that's credible, but you can find it if you do your own research, and I'm going to help you out here on Chaos Corner. Talking about the press is what we're also going to cover. Tracking the wild warriors of the roped jungle. Rock'em Sock'em radio shows, podcasts, reality TV. Kind of like here on Chaos Corner. Magazines of mayhem. I was a PWI guy for years, but not so much in 2023. Newsletters by snail mail. Go back to the days of the late, great Georgianne Macropolis, who I talk to all the time on the phone. What an unbelievable person, human being, and lady. Rest in peace, Georgianne. Siphoning of the cyber sheets. That's right, from the Torch to Meltzer and everybody in between. All you geeks and freaks and dweebs and nerds. I get it, man. I guess I'm included in that now as well. I mean, am I right? Digests and other sources of information. From the time when news was exclusivity, delivered in print, to today when it comes in a variety of formats. Wrestling coverage by the media has undergone a radical change, and this is dated back 25 years ago. How are we now in 2023? I'm here before the turn of the century. I mean, we're going back to the 90s, even the 80s. And it applies today, and I say it just about in every show. Recognize where you've been, where you came from. Take a look back, honor it, respect it, examine it. Don't stay there too long because you can't go back and get it. But without the past and the respect of that, and the knowledge, and the learning, and the
that's
wisdom.
when we realized who the real killer was. But first, a quick message
Alexa,
from our
lower the volume.
What? I need to know who
What the
did
heck
it now.
happened here on
This
Chaos
suspense is
Corner?
killing.
This is a murder mystery?
Good news, true crime lovers.
Alexa, play tropical bird and thunderstorm sounds. I don't want to be a part of a murder mystery.
Playing specific songs is only available with Amazon Music Unlimited.
You see
Here's
what
a
happens?
station based on rainforest, bird sounds, and thunderstorm soothing rainstorm for lucid dreaming by 125 nature sounds.
You can't make it up here at Chaos Corner. See what happens when you're one man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog. No Patreon, no super chats, no paywalls. What you see is what you get, and I bring you into my home. Basic, simplicity, keep it simple, stupid, keep it relatable, and put out the information to you, the fans, from what I love and from what you love. And that's a perfect example of it. It happens almost every episode. All right, fans, back on to what we were talking about. The media has undergone a radical change, as we know. The wrestling coverage by the media, whether it's the scrums and the dirt sheets and podcasts and everybody that we listen to. I'm not going to sit here and name them all. I could do it all day. You see, it's giving me a headache already. Time was you had to follow the news through small columns in the paper, or maybe pick up a radio broadcast if you were lucky enough to live near a station that covered the sport. Kind of like WFAN did back in the late 80s and early 90s with Rich Mancuso and Jody Mack. That was a heck of a show. It came on at like 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I listened to it all the time back then. And of course, the number one stars today, radio shows, talk shows, podcasts, JD from New York off the script, Don Tony and the sit down, Jim Cornette, Eric Bischoff, the list goes on and on. Dirty Dutch Mantel, it really is flooded the market and had flooded the podcast scene in YouTube with all these different shows that you can watch and catch up on the news. Even Vanguard Radio is one of the tops right now. Of course, Jim Cornette probably is number one throughout the world as far as his show goes. These days, however, keeping track of pro wrestlers is pretty easy. Again, this was 25 years ago. 2023, it's even easier. So remember the time frame and the history that I put out here on this channel. And it applies today. If you have access to the internet and the World Wide Web, you can follow all of your favorite wrestlers day by day or minute by minute. Magazines devoted to pro wrestling are plentiful. And while there are very few newspapers that are willing to provide regular space for the coverage of wrestling news and matches, there are plenty of radio stations and newsletters out there that are far more willing to pick up the slack, and especially in 2023. Fans, I can't stress it enough. I know I'm being redundant. I know I'm repeating it. I know I'm grabbing my head from the information. I get it. But this is the most important thing for the people that are not involved in the ring taking the bumps, and that's you guys. You'll learn about the role here today of television and other media, which I'm a huge part of right now and have been for the last 2 decades. While I was in the ring, even longer. In these pages that I'm reading from and that expanding on my experience and giving you my personal stories, you'll learn a bit about the history of wrestling coverage. But more importantly, you'll learn about all the print and internet sources available to you. So you can tap into all the information out there and follow the shows and stars and events on your own. And again, I know that I feel like I'm going back in time in the time machine here on this show. But this is to prove the point of how it relates to today and how much things have changed. Yes, and I am representing Bam Bam and Michael and Buddy Jack and Jimmy Jam, I guess. Bad Street, Atlanta, GA. Bad Street in the whole USA. Bad Street, nasty and hot. The further down the block, the worse it got. Bad Street, Atlanta, GA. Bad Street in the whole USA. I have to sing that when I wear the throwback memorabilia. What a perfect shirt for today's show. Keeping a finger on wrestling's pulse, as the GOC does. Staying in touch with what's going on in the world of pro wrestling has probably never been easier. The internet, not to mention home pages and other websites, and chat rooms by the score, have opened up an almost unbelievable opportunity for wrestling fans. There are official sites of all major promotions to visit, and countless personal sites dedicated to wrestling. Beyond the World Wide Web, there are also some talk shows on television that keep you, the fans, up to date on pro wrestlers, and this is the place to be as far as talk shows go in the world of professional wrestling. When you put together all the wrestling-oriented media, you'll quickly see that you could make just staying on top of the news of the industry into a full-time job. Ain't that the truth? The relationship between the press and wrestling is a brief history. Once upon a time, back before the Great Flood, wrestling was a big news and dominated the sports pages of newspapers. Of course, back then there were far fewer forms of entertainment available, so wrestling had a lot less competition. All of that changed in 1910 when the press got word that Frank Gotch beat George Hackenschmidt by means most foul. Suddenly, reporters found themselves outraged that all the wrestling wasn't quite as it appeared to be. Wrestling at the press and the press were no longer cozy buddies, and there's pretty much wrestling going on at the press today. For example, AEW. I had to throw that in there. Alexa, lower the volume. Alexa, lower the volume. I feel like I'm caught up in a water event. Keep your eyes open for that, too. So we're talking Hackenschmidt and Frank Gotch, 1910. We're really going back. Wrestling and the press were no longer cozy buddies, as I said, and press coverage of wrestling was the oddity variety. Only Strangler Lewis and Jim Londos got serious coverage. See, that's what you get here. Is any other podcast talking about Strangler Lewis, Jim Londos, Frank Gotch, George Hackenschmidt? I don't think so. And I don't really call this a podcast. I guess it's in the group, though. Wrestling languished in the darkness of anonymity, say that 3 times fast, for the next 4 decades, and on the rare occasion when it was mentioned, it was only to provide a columnist the opportunity to write something cynical, a la Sam Mushnick. Snide references to its performance rather than sport. Make no mistake about it, it is a sport. Get in there and try it, I dare you. Exposure. Let's talk about exposure. No, I'm not going to expose myself here. This is a rated PG channel. You guys get it, right? Nobody had more fun putting professional wrestling down than Dan Parker, the well-respected sports editor of the New York Daily Mirror, along with Mushnick from the Post or the News, whatever the fuck he wrote for, who wrote in the 1930s. Remember what I said about looking in the back, looking in the past. You won't be where you are today or where you want to go without recognizing the past. I'm not saying stay back there. I talked about this 5 minutes ago and I didn't finish it. Recognize it, respect it, honor it. Then look in that front windshield, step on the gas, full speed ahead. Getting back to the reporters and the media that put down this industry, this business of pro wrestling. Week after week, Dan Parker, Mushnick, all the like, would not only predict the winner of the upcoming bout, but even toss in the particular hold that would end the match and give the exact time of the winning pin. So much for wrestling's credibility as a competitive sport. The wrestlers decided to throw him a curveball, so to speak. The occasion was one of the famous Jim Londos, Ray Steele matches. Google it, do your research, DuckDuckGo it. History is what you get here. A series that lit up wrestling's skies in that era. The Mirror had carried Parker's column predicting that Londas would win with his famous airplane spin in 50 minutes. Well, 1 out of 3 ain't bad. Londas did indeed win, but he did it with a series of flying tackles and took 57 minutes and 30 seconds. Parker's omniscience was struck a cruel blow. That's right, I said omniscience. The next day, Parker's column, again, the New York columnist, bashing pro wrestling like Mushnick did in the 80s. Parker's column was bordered in black and headlined "An Apology to the Public." He wrote that he was deeply humiliated about having been off on the time and for getting the winning hold wrong. This, after all, was wrestling. There was no excuse for such an error. Well, Parker's columns were nationally syndicated. His exposure of wrestling's non-competitive nature was so widespread that nobody could fool himself into believing the action was real anymore. And Gates dropped off to nothing almost overnight because of this douchebag. Pardon the language. Bicoastal condensation. Wait. Condensation? Does that even sound right? Condescension. While many reporters took it to sneering at wrestling's staginess, there were exceptions to the rule. Time magazine ran a profile on the Dusek brothers in 1935, and local papers still hyped the performers at local shows. But the major city papers continued to put pro wrestling down with condescension, condescending, and snobbery. New York Herald Tribune columnist Red Smith, here we go again. Alexa, play tropical bird sounds and stop interrupting Chaos Corner. New York Herald Tribune columnist Rod Smith, for example, lamented that wrestling has degenerated as entertainment since the dear dead days of Londas and Lewis. And he later critiqued the performance by Gorgeous George with the trenchant, "It's difficult to do justice to Gorgeous George's act. This side the libel laws." Really? A colleague over at the Times wrote from the drama desk, "Gorgeous George, phooey, not Hong Kong phooey." Is that before your guys' times? Hong Kong phooey, yeah! Maybe not. This is what you get here. Entertainment personified. Alexa, play tropical rainstorm sounds, please.
Play a specific song with an Amazon Music Unlimited free trial on
You see what I'm going through here.
It's free for 30 days.
It's raw dog and
$4.99
unedited,
until you cancel.
Unscripted.
Terms in the Alexa app.
I mean, am I right?
Should I start your free
as she
trial
rambles
and play
on.
a majestic tropical
It's
thunderstorm?
unbelievable. No.
Okay, I can play similar music instead for free. Here's a station for you based on the
if
song
it's free,
Majestic
it's
Tropical
for me.
Thunderstorm by Music for Deep
I am
Sleep on Amazon
President
Music.
of the NRA Club. That's not National Rifle Association. It's never refused anything. And a lot of you fans out there seem like you're that type of people. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, we're 23 minutes in here. We've been sidetracked by Alexa at least a couple of times. So let's see if we can get back onto the squared circle in the history here at Chaos Corner. Wrestling didn't get much respect from the West Coast press either. Writers out there weighed in with equally stinging appraisals of what they called the wrestling dodge. Jim Murray of the LA Times wrote, "The World Wrestling Federation matches are all faked." Hello, McFly. Bueller, anyone? McFly? Oh, lordy. Thank God I'm only, well, let's not get to go down that road. The true believers, the hardcore wrestling fans, just ignored such coverage. Or people like yours truly who have actually competed and stepped in the ring and know what it's like and realize that it's a physical sport, more physical than perhaps any of the major sports. And that's a fact. But wrestling promoters needed more than the hardcore. For them, press coverage was a depressant. It depressed their psyches, and it depressed their receipts at the gate. Small wonder then that they began eschewing the mainstream press and turning to friendlier venues. That's smart business, but you see where it is in 2023. What did I say yesterday or the other day on Behind the Locker Room Door? What is it, 15, 20 hours a week on major national TV? 5, 6 nights a week, not counting pay-per-views, the smaller organizations, the independents. It's oversaturation. It's good and it's bad. So you see how much the business has changed, and it covered everywhere, from podcasts to dirt sheets. Everybody, like I said, their brother, mother, sister's uncle, cousin, sister's ass has a podcast. And I think that rhymes. So the smaller, just here in this region, we have anywhere from 3 to 5 shows a weekend at times. In any given month, there's 10 shows in this state. There's probably a good, at any one given time, whether they're from in-state or run in the state, 15 or 20 promotions. And that's just in a small state here in the greater New England tri-state Northeast area. The Constitution state, if you will, the nutmeg state, in the shadows of Titan Towers, and maybe even now Endeavor in the UFC. Slick pages for slick wrestlers. And again, if you're not using your social media to promote the shows, to promote yourself, especially what happened in the pandemic, I don't know what you guys are doing to adapt and overcome and promote yourself. It really is a tool that you should be using to get exposure. I can't stress that enough in all seriousness. The first alternative media outlet was the Boxing Bible, Ring Magazine. Its very first issue, published in February of 1922, was devoted to boxing, wrestling, and billiards. Boxing, wrestling, and billiards. It doesn't get much better than that. Its editor, Nate Fleischer, devoted an entire section of the magazine to wrestling throughout the lean years of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, before my time. I'm a 60s baby. The combination of boxing and wrestling was picked up in the late 50s by Stanley Weston's formerly Ring's Wrestling Section editor, who now published his own magazine, Boxing Illustrated Wrestling Review. By 1961, the two subjects had gone their separate ways, and Wrestling Review became the first publication totally dedicated to the sport. Wrestling Review. Alexa, play Tropical Thunderstorm and Bird Sounds and stop interrupting me.
Playing specific songs is only available with Amazon Music Unlimited. Here's a station based on rainforest, bird sounds, and thunderstorm soothing rainstorm for lucid dreaming by 125 Nature Sounds.
Welcome back to Chaos Corner. With Wrestling's Review's first issue, again, the first magazine on its own, 1961 Wrestling Review, for all you fans out there for trivia. Wrestling had finally come up with its own voice and its first alternative to the mainstream press. This was the beginning of the print media expressly devoted to wrestling. Within a few short years, this one publication was joined by a burgeoning field of fanzines, and wrestling promoters turned to the non-critical coverage provided by these publications to put out their gospel to the fans through interviews and exclusives. Wrestling magazines in the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, for me as a young boy between the ages of like 6 and 7 years old, all the way up to entering college at 17 years old, the magazine era was perhaps the best to learn from the territories and all over the world. Works, shoots, or not, degree of truth to it, it brought you to the imagination of the arena and where you couldn't go. And that's how I found out and researched and did my education as a historian through all those magazines. And the best part of my life in this industry really was. And fans that didn't grow up with the magazines, and now you have very few, like PWI, which has been around forever, since the late 70s, I believe, but it's turned into shit. That's just a plain, nothing against the writers. They're doing what they're told. They're trying to be creative. Nothing against, I know some of the folks over there, great people. But the magazine itself and the way it's portrayed and put out is just total garbage. It's not realistic. You have to be more real with it. That's just my opinion from a guy who grew up in the magazine era. It's just that simple. It really is. So we're talking about the magazines, Wrestling Review. Let's go on from hooliganism to heroes, the changing face of the fanzine coverage. This is a great episode. We're 30 minutes in. Stay with me here. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Come on now. Early wrestling magazines like Wrestling Review, Wrestling Monthly, and The Wrestler fell all over themselves. Let me start that again. Early wrestling magazines like Wrestling Review, Wrestling Monthly, and The Wrestler, they were all good magazines, fell all over themselves to report the latest happenings in the ring. Like when Freddie Blassie begot blood from the brow of Ricky Dozan in his famous match in Japan. Konnichiwa, bitches. They all ran screaming cover stories with headlines like Bloodbath of the Year, a saga written in blood, and where there's blood, there's Blassie. Wrestling magazines in their early days based their marketing on the perceived bloodiness of the sport. They learned early on the gorier the cover, the better their sales. So they loved the Terry Funk battle with Harley Race. It meant more gory covers, as did any bout featuring bloodthirsty Taro Miyaka. And so it went up through the 70s. And just recently, over the last week, some of the writers and people involved with the rankings bullshit over there at PWI and just with all the magazines was on Busted Open Radio with LaGreca and Bully Ray and Tommy Dreamer and the ilk talking about this. So this is pretty ironic and definitely apropos for what's going on in the current industry. As I said, what I bring to you on this channel applied 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago to current day in 2023. Class is back in session. But with the explosion of wrestling as an entertainment phenomenon in the 80s, a whole new dimension was added. Wrestling was now all over the tube, and heroes galore were emerging overnight. Wrestling was suddenly coming out of the sports closet and was on the cusp of becoming socially acceptable. The magazines responded by toning down their bloody, exploitive covers and moving into coverage of the stars rather than the events. It could have been a mistake. I don't know. Just giving you my opinion. Yeah, we still have that right in this country, but who knows? Get right with the big man. I mean that. And even the mainstream press started covering wrestling again. And look what's happening here in 2023. Commercials during the Super Bowl, a Fox Network, USA, TNT, TBS, people paying $50 a pop to watch pay-per-views. And of course, the Peacock has the WWE Network, which was a mistake in itself. They got apps, you got Fight TV, you have IWTV. It really is incredible what's happening in the world of pro wrestling. This time around, however, the stories treated wrestling as an event, not a sport, and focused on the celebrities that suddenly began appearing at ringside, all the way back to rock and wrestling. It really was incredible back in that era. Check it out when MTV was MTV. While the tone and content of wrestling's media coverage changed, another revolution was in the wind. A whole new generation of writers and reporters had sprung up. And again, this is 25 years ago. How about today? Anybody and their brother, like I said, I'll repeat it again. Everybody's doing it. One whose opinions of the sport weren't colored by old-time attitudes and prejudices. Most of these new writers knew wrestling from TV. Again, part of the problem and issue of never getting in the ring. Expecting it to be entertainment instead of competition and reported on it accordingly. In Ira Berkow in Chicago, Bert Sugar in Washington, Warner Wolf of Washington in New York. These are just a few of these new breed of wrestling reporters, legends, looking back on it now. Wolf, an announcer, remembers growing up in D.C. in the late 40s, when wrestling was really the only regular sporting event on television. He watched all the greats from Antonina Rocca to Gorgeous George to Slave Girl Moolah. 50s is when television was invented, and that's when wrestling really exploded. It was one of the best things and few things to watch on TV. It really was. The first golden era of pro wrestling was probably the 50s and the TV era. And then into the late 70s and to the early and middle 80s of the explosion of taking over the territories in the WWF. And then into the Attitude and Aggression era, I guess. And WCW, WWF Monday Night Roars, and Wars, and then the explosion of ECW to impact the scene, and of course the constant steady of the backbone of this business, which would be the independent scene. Think about what a revelation it was when I used to watch The Time Machine with George Michael. I think that's who it was, and with Warner Wolf and all the different guys talking about wrestling and covering it from the Garden back in the day, and down south, watching the different channels down there, where it'd be like a perfect square right there. No? Now that's squared shoulders. Talking about squaring up, right? Let's get back onto what we're talking about. Chet Kopic, the voice of Chicago, is another of the new breed. He recalls the old Jack Brickhouse broadcast from Marigold Arena. To me, as an 8-year-old boy, Hans Schmidt was more frightening than learning the multiplication tables. And to me, Vern Gagne was the Eisenhower administration in tights. He learned early on the allure of these larger-than-life heroes. The upshot of this change in orientation among reporters was that the press was no longer obsessively concerned with exposing the fakery of wrestling. The focus was on wrestling as a part of popular culture. And again, I'll do a whole episode on fake and wrestling, and scripted and choreographed, and being a stuntman, and athletics and martial arts and bumping, and you guys won't know your ass from your elbow. Don't take offense. I'm telling the truth. I'm telling it like it is, because that's what I do. And again, I'm talking about Warner Wolf and all the different guys that were on here, and Ira Burkow and so on and so forth. Once it became more mainstream, and even, like I said, onto FAN with Jody Mack and Rich Mancuso. It really is something. And then even in the later 90s, my old buddy who I moderate for now, Don Tony, was involved way back then as well, too, 25 years ago, as was I, in the middle 90s, already doing cable access and doing what people do now, like it's something new, when guys like Don Tony have been doing it for 20, 25 years, and I've been doing this for over 35 years. Let that sink in. It's the truth. These are the facts. Today, in sharp contrast to the past, always recognize it, respect it, honor it, professional wrestling is covered by a wide variety of media, and even more so now. Again, I'm dating this 20, 25 years ago. Remember that, fans, the time frame that we're in right now here on Chaos Corner, and how it affects current day, and you can see how it has trended to even more so, and scrutinized and magnified today. That's why I bring this to you as a history lesson from what I want to share with this business. And this is the third or fourth time I've been interrupted on this show. Is it really fair? Alexa, play tropical, musical, thunderstorm, bird sounds. I think she's listening to me. Somebody's listening. Today, as I said, in sharp contrast in the past, professional wrestling is covered by a wide variety of media. These are specialized magazines, internet sites, newsletters, radio shows, and even a few major city newspapers have returned to the fold to provide coverage. Read on for a broad sampling of the options available to you. The Fan, in your quest to follow your favorite stars, shows, events, and extravaganzas and bonanzas. And as I said, how it is today, you almost can't get away from it. It's the truth. Stand by. Don't go anywhere. We're not done yet. Wrestling on the radio is coming up. What am I looking for? Got to stay hydrated. Very important. Fans, you got to be on that health kick. Yeah, I've been talking to my docs lately, going for a series of checkups and tests and stuff like that. Not to be too much on a personal note here, but that's what this channel is all about. Didn't receive the greatest news, but not bad news, and I got to really step it up. And I need you fans to spur me on by this show. It's the most important thing you can do, is hydrate and exercise and eat right. We've been hearing it, since we were kids. It's true, and I'm finding that now, even more so, slacking off over these last couple of years, and now pushing the big 6-0. So I appreciate you guys. Prayers for everybody out there. Hollywood Hogan likes to play air guitar as he approaches the ring. No surprise. Since he used to play for a rock band, well documented, you can see this in a televised match or out there in the arena. But it's just the sort of detail you miss out on if you get your match coverage only on the radio, which I happen to love. But then again, sometimes you can't get to a live show, and TV's not available. Radio program is there to fill in the gap, and there are more than a dozen radio stations that dedicate regular airtime to the coverage of wrestling. Not so much now, and that would be a great idea to broadcast the live events on the radio as well, if possible, so you can develop your mind, so you can imagine it, like listening to baseball on the radio, on your transistor radio, AM, FM, back in the day. That's what it's all about in history, and bringing you back, touching grass, getting out there in the sun, realizing what it's all about and listening to the sounds of pro wrestling. There really isn't much better if you're a fan. I mean, or if you're in the business. And I'd like to bring that back, wrestling on the radio. Radio program is there to fill in the gap, and there are more, like I said, more than a dozen stations. Again, remember the time frame here. The odds are good that you can find at least a few radios that regularly broadcast wrestling matches no matter where you live. And again, it's different now in 2023. Here's a sampling of what's out there in some parts of the country. Radio venues are hard to keep current. A fan will buy a license and hold forth on the air for a time, then fade into the woodwork at renewal time. So any listings for radio shows can only be provisional. And this is what people do now with podcasts and that platform. So I'm going to give you some information. Again, this is over 2 decades ago, but this is nice for nostalgia. And let's face it, nostalgia just ain't what it used to be. If you live in the Atlanta, Georgia area, you can tune in to radio station 1010 AM on Sunday afternoons to catch the Wrestling Insider Show. Fans in Baltimore, Maryland area should listen to Pro Wrestling 11 from 5 to 7:30 p.m. on Saturdays on WLG 1360 AM. Talk about going back in time frame. This is what we're doing here on Chaos Corner. Florida gives wrestling fans the Wrestling Insiders on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to noon. Check out WAMT 1060 AM for this show. Folks in Knoxville, Tennessee have access to Pro Wrestling Insider. This show runs from 12:30 to 1:30 on Saturday afternoons on WQBB 1040 AM. The Rowdy Roddy Piper Show on KXYX 1010 AM is out there for people in Portland, Oregon. The show runs from noon to 1. Rest in peace, Roddy. This shows you the time frame. Roddy Piper, 25 years ago, had his own wrestling radio show in Portland, Oregon. Washington, D.C. is the home to the main event. This radio spot runs from 11 p.m. to midnight on WTM 570 AM, generally on Saturdays. Residents of Rhode Island have Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Digest to tune into. The station is AM 1320 WARA, and the time is from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. People in and around Detroit, Michigan can listen to Pro Wrestling Ringside on Thursday nights from 9 to 10 on WCAR 1090 AM. And of course, you know my history of when I first dated back to the late 70s when I did my internship at WLNV 1310, was it? WLNV Radio, and then of course went on to Connecticut School of Broadcasting, but ended up behind the walls in the DOC, and you see where I am now. But wrestling on the radio, great idea, great business, and it was tremendous to envision back then. And that's why I'm giving you the nostalgia of some of these radio stations and radio shows. And stay tuned for Chaos on the radio as well, besides here on YouTube and all the other social media platforms. Wrestling fans in New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia have a wide choice of radio programs on which they can keep track of their wrestling heroes and villains. Here in the greater New England tri-state Northeast area, as I say, in the shadows of Titan Towers, there are at least 5 radio stations that blast the airwaves with wrestling facts, figures, and news. In the New Jersey area, the following is a list of them. WGBB 1240 AM, Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m. with John Arezzi. He's got a good book out too, and his radio shows back then were tremendous. I just got his book recently. Arezzi really was a legend on the radio for pro wrestling. WRUN 11:50 a.m. Sunday from 6 to 8 p.m. Let's Talk Wrestling. WNWR 1540 a.m. Sunday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Wrestling Radio, and 90.5 FM Saturday at 1 p.m. on Hofstra University Radio. Remember, fans, we're going back over 2 decades ago, so I wanted to give this all to you. Off the Rack magazines, again, there's nothing like it. Really was something to behold, and that's a part of my childhood growing up that I could just sit here and lament on forever. There are entire racks of magazines devoted exclusively to professional wrestling, and it seems like a new one sprouts up on the stands every time you look. Most of the publications are dedicated to news and pictures of wrestlers, managers, valets, promoters, and other key players involved in the wrestling industry. The magazines carry some advertising, like the women's apartment wrestling back in the day. How crazy was that? Non-sanctioned and bikini. But I'm just going off on a tangent of what I remember. The magazines carry some advertising, but most of them are dedicated heavily to pro wrestling. What advertising there is tends to be focused on peripherals to the industry, collectibles, training schools, and so forth. It takes only a stroll through a newsstand, or at least it used to see how prolific wrestling magazines have become. Publishers haven't been slow to catch on to the huge interest out there amongst us, the fans, the workers, the talent, for any kind of news about their favorite stars of the ring. Here are a few that I'm going to throw at you to start with, but keep your eyes open for the new ones appearing all the time. And back then, I would go into the cigar store, the magazine store, and there'd literally be 25 different magazines. Let's remember that. What is there now? 1? Maybe 2? Really has changed. Everybody most likely has a favorite magazine. I'm no different. I look for in-depth coverage, great writing, and plenty of photographs. I give high marks to publications that keep their readers informed about what's going on behind the scenes, in the offices of the station itself, the arena owners, the promoters, the managers, and the fucking accuracy. Of the Starlog Group publications, the only title available by subscription is Wrestling All-Stars Heroes and Villains. And that was at the Starlog Group on 475 Park Avenue South in New York City. And of course, subscription now would be Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Again, I'm not here to shit on PWI. Big fan, got hundreds of articles and stuff in magazines from the past, and I still buy it to today. But I have big problems with the rankings and some of the stories they present. Total bullshit. WWF Magazine, for those of you that remember, wasn't that long ago, is the official magazine of the WWF. You can buy it at a newsstand. It costs $3.99. And this was 25 years ago. As you might imagine, the publication is centered on the wrestlers of the WWF. This one's a true high-quality read. $3.99 back then. Raw is put out as a subsidiary of the Raw is War television product. It's published monthly with a newsstand price of $3.99 and an annual subscription price of $24 for a subscription to this WWF magazine, a right to Titan Sports, and it's addressed in Illinois, and it's really not. It's in Stamford, Connecticut. And you see the limited magazines they had back then for the WWF, and they branched out compared to the other 25 different publications. And I read this to you guys and present it to you for your own history and knowledge, so you'll learn something from this that you can bring to the table at your next show, your next signing, your next event, your next chat, your next podcast, or around a water cooler. WCW Magazine, the official magazine of Turner's WCW, is published monthly as well and sells for $3.95. Look at the prices here back 25 years ago, as we well know, and has an annual subscription price of $20. Right, WCW Magazine, 1 CNN Center, Atlanta, Georgia. Magazines published, Ringside Wrestling is published 10 times a year, $3.99 at the newsstand. Again, keep it in mind. I keep repeating it. I get it. I understand. I don't have to keep saying it, but for some of you, I do. George Napolitano Big shout out to George, unbelievable photographer, writer. We follow each other on social media. An unbelievable human being. He's the Ringside's editor, one of the best writers currently associated with pro wrestling, so you can count on the real deal presented in style, and that applies to George today, who's my age or older. What a legend, George Napolitano. Some fans just can't live without a plethora of color photos and pull out pinups. If it's your bag, if that's your bag, wasn't that a character on the Fonz? Happy Days? Wasn't there a guy known as Bag? Is that before your guys' time? Is anybody still listening at 50 minutes in? Bag from the Fonz, Happy Days? Get back to me on that. Superstar wrestlers is definitely going to be your cup of tea if you want pull-out pinups, photos, or your scotch or vodka besides your cup of tea. I'm just saying, the old Blarney Stone, you know how the business was and is. Published quarterly, it'll run you $4.99 at the newsstand. With Michael Benson as the managing editor and George Napolitano as editor, this magazine delivers plenty of punch. Again, history, time frame. Wrestling All-Stars Heroes and Villains is another high-quality magazine that's well worth checking out. It's published 10 times a year, and a single issue is $3.99. Now I think the single issues are $9.99, some of them $14.99. Wow. And wow spelled backwards is wow. If you're keeping your finger on the pulse of pro wrestling, don't overlook TV Wrestlers. It's published 6 times a year with a cover price of $4.99. A little heavier on the color photos than text. It's a great source for up-to-the-minute news of your favorite televised shows and stars. Whether your preference is for wrestling beauties or its beasts, there are specialized magazines just for you. The Beauties of Wrestling and Badass Dudes are both published twice annually with a cover price of $4.99. This is from Captain Lou's Corner. For a subscription mailed to London Publishing Company in Marion, Ohio, there are some combination subscription offers. Order The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling, which was an unbelievable magazine back in the day, for a year, and you'll pay $55 for 2 magazines for a year. Talk about inflation. Add Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and you'll be shelling out $81.50 if you go with the Wrestle America and Wrestling Superstars combo. You'll pay $37.95. Look at the prices. I have to present this and bring this to you guys just for the sheer history and nostalgia of it. And the magazines, The Wrestler was an unbelievable mag. It really was. Inside Wrestling. I already talked about Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Wrestle America, Wrestling Superstars. It really is something. Inside Wrestling provides fewer color photos than most of the other publications. There's real meat in that magazine's bones. It sells for $3.50 back then, and the annual subscription for 13 issues was $29. The Wrestler comes out 13 times a year back then. Monthly magazine carries a cover price of $2.50. A 13-issue subscription is $29.20. This is the one to get for the sake of text if you're going back 2 decades, 3 decades ago. They don't do much with color photos, but they do run good black and whites. It's definitely worth a look. Pro Wrestling Illustrated, current day, the Bible in the pro wrestling industry. I don't like to use that word, but, you know, as an example. Also comes out, now this is back 25 years ago compared to now. Do your homework and your research. Pro Wrestling Illustrated comes out 13 times a year with a cover price of $2.50 and an annual subscription price of $34.70. One of the more pricey ones, even back here in the late 90s, as we go back. A complete idiot's guide to the world of pro wrestling. That's for you. What are you charging now, PWI? Don't make me look around here and try to find some magazines and inflation, but the coverage in the media and the writing certainly isn't as good. And that's no disrespect to the current crop of talent over there at PWI. Wrestle America, Wrestling Analyst, and Wrestling Superstars all came out 6 times a year. For each of the single issues, it was $3.95, $3.95, and a year subscription was $20.14. To put it all in perspective. The Snail Mail Express newsletters, the Figure 4 newsletter, the Mat Marketplace, On the Mat, the Pile Driver, Pro Wrestling Monthly, Pro Wrestling Torch, Pro Wrestling Update, the Western Ringside Report, the Wrestling Chatterbox, Wrestling Down Under, the Wrestling Lariat, the Wrestling Observer, Wrestling Perspective, and Wrestling Then and Now. Those were the snail mails, chatterboxes, newsletters, Mail Express. If you're on one of the shrinking minority that hasn't yet entered the age of the personal computer, again the time frame, you're at a distinct and distant advantage, just like today in 2023, where I was forced into all this social media stuff to try to promote and brand, which I guess is a smart idea, but a double-edged sword. It really is. You got to be careful, you got to be professional. You got to be accurate. Without online access, you're missing out on the latest gold mine of information. You can fill the gaps in your knowledge of what's going on in industry by subscribing to traditional newsletters, most of them online, a counterpart these days, and check out the following that I just read. And today, it's podcasts. It's the dirt sheets. It's the rags. It's Patreon. That's what it is, right? That's what today, the Snail Mail Express newsletters and magazines have all turned into podcasts. It's a big problem. It's a double-edged sword. It's just my opinion. Just telling you how it is here on this show. An interesting show. We're coming up on almost an hour. Wizards of the Web. Online access opens up a whole new world of professional wrestling, as we know, for the fans. What followers and some of the preferred sites back then, will do this for history. Scoops magazine was big back in the day. Soley's Vintage Wrestling, the late great Gordon Soley, one of the best, if not the best ever. The Wrestling Review, really incredible. The WCW Arena, the WWF Attitude Archives, MikasaWrestling.com, Wrestling News Analysis and Commentary with Attitude from Online Onslaught, daily news, weekly wraps, interactive archives, calendars, local news, the independents, even fantasies. Ray's Wrestling Review back in the day, the Torture Rack for some of you guys that remember that, and some of you gals that remember the Shooting Star Press. If that's not enough, there was even more back then. Again, I'm being redundant here because of what's going on in current 2023 and the social media and the internet and the World Wide Web, if you want to call it. I mean, when I first started, it was web TV. And I actually had a newsletter and a website. So it's totally different. If you remember back in the day, to jar your memory and just to give you some more history, the Bagpipe Report, the Cauliflower Alley Club, Oh My God Wrestling, Professional Wrestling Online Museum, some of them still going today. Woo Wrestling, or WrestleManiacs, One Wrestling with the legendary Bill Apter. There's just a bunch of different things, and you can go to all the different websites, and especially the one that I currently work for right now, and that would be ParadiseAlleyProWrestling.com. That's right, PAPW.com, ParadiseAlleyProWrestling.com, along with the WWE.com, ECW Wrestling back in the day.com, WCW Wrestling.com, all the different things today, AEW Wrestling.com, MLW, the NWA, Ring of Honor, New Japan, Impact Wrestling. The list goes on and on and on and on. Fans, we're going to get on to hotlines and digests, the dandy digests, information police, and then the least you need to know. So we're going to go over an hour, but we'll get through this. It's an interesting topic of social media, what it was like back in the day and the history of it and where we are now. So bear with me. We're on an hour right now. Don't go anywhere. Listen to it at your leisure. Come back and check it out. Share this. Spread this. I haven't even hit the espresso yet. Espresso, not espresso. I'm not from New York City, where they say axe instead of ask. I got to hydrate, fans. I'm trying to get healthier. Thanks for bearing with me. It means a lot from the bottom of my heart. I really do love what I do. You can tell by the passion and intensity and how often I do it. Magazines and websites are probably the most used forms of keeping track of pro wrestling and wrestlers. Newsletters and radio stations do a great job of filling in whatever gaps the first two leave in your information base. If you still can't get enough, never fear. Wrestling Digest and Wrestling Hotlines are out there just for fans like you. As I said, the Wrestling Hotline with Mean Gene Okerlund, so on and so forth back in the day, WCW, and of course my old buddy who I still moderate for now, Don Tony, had the Wrestling Hotline. DT, my old buddy, in the sit-down. Fans, if you're not listening and following and subscribe to Don Tony, I don't know what the hell you're doing in the IWC and the pro wrestling community. Passion, longevity, knowledge, a humor. It doesn't get much better than Don Tony. And that's when I first originally heard of Don Tony. While I was doing my thing here, Don Tony was doing his thing in New York City. Who knew? Right? And now we're back together all these years later. He really is one of the most entertaining and informative out there that knows what he's talking about. If he says it, listen to it because it's usually accurate. He's one funny bastard, too. And he was in the business. He took the bumps. He was in the ring. He was a manager. That's the difference. That's what we have in common. That's why I respect him more than most in that industry of podcasting and dirt sheets. Because Don Tony, not only does he talk the talk, he walked the walk at one time. That's why you listen to Don Tony like you listen to the Guardian of Chaos. Pro Wrestling Illustrated, we already talked about it, is heavy into facts and statistics. The 1998 edition carries the 10 biggest stories of the previous year, a date-by-date overview of all the 1997 wrestling events, PWI weekly honors, vital statistics on wrestlers, height, weight, birthdays, and so forth. The top 500 wrestlers, the PWI 500, which just came out. Title histories of active and inactive wrestlers, 100 years of wrestling highlights, wrestling obituaries, the greatest wrestling crowds, historic wrestling bouts that were not on pay-per-view, who's in and who's out, and pay-per-view listings and results. Believe us when we say that PWI is worth much more than its cover price of $4.95. This one source of wrestling data that can't be beat, it's a champion. 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. What happened in 2023 PWI? Are you listening? Do you realize what you were and where you are? No offense. Just giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Wrestler, another great magazine, which was published quarterly. We just reviewed this. These are the Hotlines Digest, the D&D Digests. The Wrestler Digest, that really was something. Statistical histories found in the PWI. It's thick with stories, performers, managers, valets, and it doesn't carry the statistical histories that found in PWI, but it has feature stories that are abundant. The Wrestler was a very good magazine. Fans, again, we know how we do it here in 2023 on the internet. I get it, in the IWC. Fans who want instant information can let their fingers do the walking. Kind of like the old yellow pages and the white pages. Remember an actual phone book and phone booths? The payphone? Am I showing my age here? Wow. Walking straight to the telephone keypad to tap into the wrestling grapevine. Telephone keypad, how funny is that? I remember when you used to dial up. Hotlines for the determined fans include the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Hotline. 1-900-884-4PWI. Why don't you try it out? It's $1.99 a minute. ECW's Hardcore Hotline, 900-446-4329. 4329. $1.99 a minute. Try that one out. The Wrestling Ringside Hotline with George Napolitano and the late great Black Jack Brown, rest in peace. $2 a minute, but the information is current. 900-680-SLAM. I wonder if those numbers still work. Those were the big ones back in the day, and then Don Tony and had his, and it really was unbelievable. And we know what Mean Gene Okerlund ended up doing in the certain hotlines. I'm guilty. I used to call them. Considering the wide array of sources for news in pro wrestling, especially today, That's why it's relatable, and that's why we're covering it. There's no excuse for not keeping tabs on the winners, the losers, the moves, the shakers, the events, and all the players within the wrestling industry. That's right, the movers and the shakers. You caught that, right? Use the source or sources of your choice. I have so many sources, I have to outsource my sources. But please take advantage of all the news and data available to you on your favorite sport. It's all there waiting for you, and that's what this show was about. History and nostalgia, what it was like compared to what it is today, and how it relates from me to you at Chaos Corner. This is the least you need to know from this episode. And come on back, because we're not going anywhere. The press has not been overly friendly to pro wrestling through much of its history. Many radio stations feature wrestling shows back then, and we're going to bring it back. Wrestling and radio. I know there's Busted Open 24/7. 13 years now. The founder, Dave LaGreca, the number one on Sirius XM, number one in the world in this industry. But nobody's calling the live events on the radio. That's what the fuck I'm talking about. Magazines are an essential source of information for wrestling fans, or at least they were. Now it's the internet. Use it at your own caution and use it wisely. The internet and World Wide Web, as we used to call it, provide fast, abundant information unlike any other source if you use it properly. There's a warning with it. Periodical digests are chock full of terrific wrestling stories from the territories, say that 3 times fast, statistics and interviews. And that's what a lot of it's provided today on podcasts and YouTube channels. No matter what social media platform you're on, Instagram, Rumble, Twitter, aka X, YouTube, Facebook. Use it as a tool, positively. Pay by the minute phone lines, what a joke, and this is the history and how we'll wrap it up, are a source of instant information on the pro wrestling industry. Fans, I had one heck of a show here today. I had a good time. I'm glad you guys were here. We had some glitches with Alexa. We're done with her. We're going to unplug her. That's where she belongs with the rest of this AI stuff and technology. Use it at your caution. Use it for good. And again, tomorrow's not guaranteed. Stay right with the Lord. Read daily. Walk daily. Have faith. No fear. Pray for each other. Love each other. That's a true message, a spiritual message. Be the best that you can be. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Judge people by the content of the character, not by the color of their skin or way they look. And remember, man and woman. Our next show is going to be Cash Cows and how you can cash in. Maybe I could even listen to that one, because that'll always apply. Who buys wrestling collectibles? Where to find collectibles on the World Wide Web, mail order companies to try, and buying at wrestling events. That is going to be one heck of an episode. So come back and check that one out. It's current to today and all the bullshit that goes on in that industry. Signing off from Chaos Corner, because I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this. Don't you dare miss it.